welcome back. And we are having a conversation with representatives of the National Aging Council. They are celebrating their 50th anniversary. And we have with us the Executive Director of the National Council on Aging, Ix-Chel Poot, and we have one of the board members of the council, Dr. Jorge Polanco, who is the non-communicable disease focal point for PAHO. Good morning and welcome.
Good morning. It's a pleasure to be here this morning.
Yes. And of course, 15 years since the establishment of the Council on Aging. Let's talk about when the government made the decision to go ahead and establish a specific council to look at the aging population.
You know, in 2002, there was a situation analysis done, and following that situation analysis, the government at the time thought it was important to invest in looking at what we're doing about aging and how we're getting older. And in 2002, the process to develop a national policy on aging began. And then following the development of the policy in February 2003, the council was established to implement that policy.
Now, the specific focus on aging, I think, is one that we perhaps don't talk about enough. And maybe just because we're getting older now, we start to think, hey, that really is important. But one of the fundamental things that has changed over the years is the life expectancy in the country. And I want to start there. What is the status in terms of the amount of years people will spend as a part of the elderly population?
Well, right now when we look at aging, I think the average age a Belizean will live to is 75. That's our official.
Yeah.
We do hear a lot more of persons hitting that 90 marker and going beyond. And going beyond. Unfortunately for men, the average age is 74. Women to 76. Yeah, it's very interesting. Around the world, that tends to be the norm, and there are several schools of thought. You know, one being that women access health care. Well, that might be one, but we have run no scientific studies to prove that. But women access health care more often than men. A woman will be more than likely to visit her doctor, go to the clinic, especially in childbearing age, and be more aware of her health status than necessarily a man. And that might be one of the reasons that contribute to women living longer. However, women will live longer, but they will live longer with more complications, higher risk of having diabetes, hypertension, some other developmental arthritis, one of those things that come along with aging. So it's kind of a catch 51. It's you know, you're living longer, but maybe not necessarily in the best of health. You know, and that's one of the reasons why we really do value our partnership with PAHO, because that gives us the opportunity to really look at healthy aging and what we're talking about aging. The UN actually has a policy on what they call active aging, and that's geared towards focusing on growing older and healthier throughout your entire life course.
Let's talk about that from the PAHO perspective.
Yeah, that's a very fundamental point that Ix-Chel made reference to, the healthy aging. It's a matter of looking at the quality of life. For sure, everybody would agree that the idea is to live in comfort, live healthy, versus have a prolonged number of years and maybe in a disabled manner. So the strategies that the Pan American Health Organization would normally promote is to look at those areas of quality, and even the disabled are not forgotten. So the fact that you have some form of disability would not put you outside. But within the organization, it is also a priority to increase the quality of life for persons with disabilities as senior citizens. But one of the fundamental strategies that we have on the forefront is to look at prevention. So in other words, we use the life cycle course, the life course approach, whereby for each age group there are certain things we would put in place for prevention and to keep you healthy. For the elderly, as young adults, the strategic plan of the National Council on Aging makes reference to putting in place measures that will ensure a healthy aging. If persons would become senior citizens with certain types of diseases, it is also a priority to approach those. And that's something very important within the National Council of Aging. In the strategic plan, they make allowance to provide those services. For example, from the health perspective, it is one of the strategic objectives of that plan, of that strategic plan, to ensure that the country, in this case, the health sector, including government, allows for persons to have access to health services, not only health but other services, housing, safe environment, for example.
Yeah. Let's look at some of the milestones you've made over the past 15 years that have significantly impacted the elderly population of Belize.
Well, we definitely have to look at what we've done to work with older persons and give them a voice, which would be our voice organization, the advocacy groups that are established in every district. And that's created a new awareness of aging, but also gave older people a platform with which to talk and discuss ideas from their perspective. I always tell people that one of the things we have to think about at the National Council on Aging is that I don't necessarily speak for older persons. I must give older persons the opportunity to speak for themselves, and that is fundamental in their human rights. We also look at the development of the National Council on Aging Strategic Plan, which comes to an end in 2019, and the markers that were laid out in that plan to improve quality of life for older persons, looking at training of caregivers that PAHO has been instrumental in. We've received support from B&E Trust, and we've been working along with BTEC in training qualified caregivers to improve quality of life of older persons. And then we look at our intergenerational work, our Storytime project, which allowed us to go into primary schools and work with older persons. And our smaller, more educational initiatives, we've done community safety workshops with older persons. We've been doing rights and wills workshops with older persons as well. So those are markers that we have hit in creating visibility. And of course, leading up to our 15th anniversary, one of the important things that we're looking at is reconnecting generations and really focusing on that intergenerational push. Because while we do talk about older persons having rights and needing their rights to be respected, it's not only a case of educating the older people, it's a case of educating our population in general so that those rights can be respected.
In your opinion, are older persons underutilized? Because as you were speaking about the life expectancy, it's also quality of life. Because, I mean, I am 40. Yes, I'm 40. But 40 is the new 15.
I'm going to agree with that.
In other countries, I know there was probably the talk of lobbying for increase in the retirement age, because when you're at 55, you're probably at your prime. Are older people underutilized, and what can be done to extract some of the beauty and experience? You know,
one of the things, I started working at the council 10 years ago as a program officer. And I went in with one perception of what it was to grow older and aging and what was there. And the more I worked with the older people, the more I realized that a lot of my own preconceived notions were completely dashed. When we're talking about markers, we do have our Senior Steps Dancing for Health group, both in Belmopan and Corozal.
Very popular dance group in Belmopan.
And these two ladies, well, these two groups, I think we need to bring Corozal on so we can really get a full gamut of what they're doing in Corozal, because they're off on a completely different angle. But you know, the first year we did a variety show, and I saw those seniors make costumes, prepare their parts, do drama, sing. It totally blew me away, because you seem to forget that they are more things outside of what we're seeing in the packaging. Almost every year they work along with the George Price Center and run a summer camp for kids voluntarily. You know, these are people who show up. The Senior Steps group and the Voice group in Corozal saw the long line of seniors to collect pensions, and they provide breakfast on pension day. The older persons themselves, they go out, they provide breakfast, they talk, they run their little surveys, they go into schools and do educational projects, and that is their own initiative. That's not a directive that comes from me. That's
they just recognize needs and
we
try
need
to
do
fill
this. But because they've been given a brand, they've been given a name, they've been given the opportunity to have a group, they then have the opportunity to branch outside of what they were originally designed to do and look for opportunities for themselves. So I think there's definitely a large group of older persons that is underutilized, that have so much more to offer.
Let me ask, because I think there's some tangible issues that we know older people face, and let's just start with a definition first of all, because people throw around elderly so easily. But there's a retirement age, there's the official golden citizen age, and I think what is also crucial to talk about is what advocacy efforts have taken place, because we know that pensions have been an issue of concern for people for a while, and for those who receive, it still is not always sufficient, and there's some who don't get. So I always try to imagine what it would be like to be 65 and not having an income, and we see it. We see elderly persons being security guards, doing day jobs because they need to survive. So let's talk about the official ages and talk about what advocacy efforts have taken place to kind of give them a better quality of life.
Well, the official age, what we call a marker for older persons, is anyone 60 plus, and that's defined by United Nations.
Okay.
In Belize, we can retire at 55, which is an early retirement. You can you become an older person at 60 officially, according to definition. But the official retirement age is 65, and at that age, all your pensions and benefits, once you've paid into a system, become due.
Okay.
So those are the three
Different ages
markers that we would be able to look at. It's very interesting that you're talking about financial planning, because later on in this year, the council will be embarking on some training, kind of financial literacy from a younger person's perspective. So we'll be looking at having our working population start to prepare. What are the things that you can do to pad out your retirement, or do you even know what you get at retirement? I like to pop that question on my friends. Like, you're paying your Social Security, you know how much you're gonna get when you retire? And nobody's ever quite sure. And then how do you calculate the figures, and what does it mean to be living, if you're 65, what does it mean for you financially to then be living to 75?
Or 90, like we see.
Or 90. And that's not even considering if something would happen to you health-wise. But there is large advocacy strategies that happen. You've been talking about the pensions program, the non-contributory pension, which is a poverty alleviation scheme. That is $100 Belize a month. Not everybody qualifies for it. There's certain parameters that must be made. And there's a lot of discussion on whether it's fair or it's not fair. I'm sure for those persons who are receiving it, it's better than not receiving anything at all. Had a lot of success with our voice groups, especially down in Dangriga, where older persons have had the service discontinued for whatever reason, the benefit, and they would go in and lobby on their behalf. So older persons speaking up on behalf of older persons and being able to have those benefits reinstated. The council did work along with HelpAge International, and we did a feasibility study towards a universal pension, looking at what it would cost us to be able to say, you know, at a certain age, all Belizeans would then come up to get X amount of dollars. So that was another advocacy strategy that we've worked on. But in the regards to financial planning, pensions, financial security, we still have a long way to go, and a much broader discussion that we need to have on what it really means to grow older financially.
Now, Dr. Polanco, let's segue into part of the health issues as well. And I didn't miss the caregiver program, because I think this is absolutely important. There are many people who are assigned or somehow fall into a role as a caregiver, and it is a challenging job. Like, as much as you love your loved one, it is just a very, very demanding task. Why was it important to have officially trained caregivers available in the country?
Yeah, let me say that the original proposal, the training manual, was done by some technical personnel here in Belize, and the Pan American PAHO had an opportunity to look at it and get input from Washington, and eventually it was approved and it's being used right now. But the truth is that indeed, when you look at the curriculum or the contents of this training manual, it's so practical, so it seems basic, but believe me, it's fundamental. I'll just mention too the issue of caring and preventing of bed sores, to use an example which is so common. And you do not need rocket science to prevent it, but you need to know the basic information, the basic activities, the day-to-day activities to prevent one bed sore that could become
a
an
massive
ulcer
infection.
and eventually leads to death. So that's just one area. You have the issue of a prevention of falls. Many times things are taken for granted, but within the home, there are very specific things that should be done, should be put in place to prevent a fall from that person. At that age, anybody above 60 already has many or could have chronic diseases that weaken the bone structure, and a fall that would seem light could be a direct and immediate cause for a fracture.
Yeah.
And experience shows that many times elderly persons, upon getting a fall, remain with that until they become disabled.
The recovery is extremely challenging.
Extremely difficult. So then the emphasis is put on preventing falls. So all that is part of the training. Another component is the nutrition. The elderly would still have a need for certain micronutrients that many times it's not present in the day-to-day food. So one of the contents, or one of the areas of that training of caregivers is to look at the needs of micronutrients for the elderly. And many times it's not a matter of having to go and buy all those supplements. It's in the food, in the day-to-day food that is available in Belize. So it's just a matter of knowing what to choose, how to prepare it. Compliance with drugs, another fundamental thing. Many times the information and education that is needed for a caregiver or for a family relative or even the person, the elderly, that they need for compliance purposes is not there. So it's reinforced through the caregivers. So these are just examples of what the training has had. BTEC has done a very
How many people have been trained so far?
I don't have the exact figure. I don't know if you have it.
But you've had several cohorts so far.
Last year we trained 82.
Oh, great.
82, and I think, but that was with the funding that was made available to us from B&E Trust. But there were other cohorts previous to that.
Excellent.
So it's been over 100, a little over 100, I believe, in total.
And it's a great career option for people.
It's a great career option, and what the funding from B&E Trust really made available was it gave us the opportunity to move the training outside of Belize City. So we had a session done in Belmopan, and in that we were able to get people from all the way from Toledo, Santa Elena, San Ignacio, and so now there's just a very preliminary discussion at how we're going to move up north and try and get
something important, after the first two cohorts, an analysis was done and the majority of them were already employed.
Wow.
So it created jobs, or let me say formal.
If I have a loved one that has to be taken care of, I would love to know the person I'm bringing in is not just going to be nice to them or keep an eye on them. They would be trained to do so. But one of the critical areas that we know can tend to lead to abuse or neglect is when there's dementia and Alzheimer's included in that mix. Does the program also offer how to work with people when they're shouting at you or resisting taking medication or whatever it is that is taking place?
The curious approach that BTEC took with this particular project is that the first components are actually customer service soft skills. So they start to field out what their personalities are. How are you able to deal with difficult situations? Because essentially you are dealing on a one-on-one customer service basis. You're dealing with somebody's personality constantly. But there's an entire module that deals with Alzheimer's and dementia within the training package itself. And so that caregivers are taught how to manage behaviors. But most importantly, one of the things that caregivers have to remember is that the behavior is not personally directed towards me. And that's always a challenge. It's not personally towards me. This is an issue larger than what's happening around us.
So that is one of the components of the training.
Yeah.
Something that Ix-Chel mentioned earlier, the issue of rights. I must say that that's something that in Belize, it has been discussed. It has been discussed in two very large forums. The last one was last year in October, whereby the intention of the PAHO's office was to promote it. Eventually, the country will review it again, and hopefully, they should, as a country, they should sign onto it. It's something that is being promoted throughout the Americas. Not many countries have signed into it, but many countries worked in the development of this a convention. It's called the Inter-American Convention for the Protection of the Rights of Older Persons. And when you look at what it does, and when you look at what the council has been done, many areas have already are being addressed. The issue of rights, of nutrition, of housing, safe environment, etc. But of course, it is necessary for the country, as a country, to formally sign on to it. And that in itself would be a milestone whereby NGOs and other government sectors would have that, let me use the word policy support.
Yeah, I think even the private sector can buy into this. I'll go into this issue that I talk about all the time. I think priority service for senior citizens should be something that all the private sector does, with or without the policy. I hate when I am standing in a line at a bank and you can visibly see an elderly person walk in, see a long line, and their face says enough, and some even leave. And while I know some banks may offer that service, they depend on personnel to come and take that personnel. But in the fact of dignity, if there's this designated area, designated line, a designated sitting area while they wait, it makes a difference. Or going into the stores or all these other places. How much of this has to do with how the community and the wider public sees the older people in our society?
Well, that's one of the functions that the council has been doing, advocacy. For example, physical structures, that's something that would come up very, very, very frequent. And when you look around, you are seeing some buildings now being built with ramps, more than...
And bathrooms too,
Yes, exactly. The bathrooms are actually catered for this age group, especially if they have some form of a disability. So it's coming on. I am not too sure how much it is as a policy within the Central Building Authority. It's something that we'd have to research. But we know it's happening already, whether if it's a written policy or not, the construction companies have that as a feature.
And those are things that we talk about, looking at how we're going to get in. And I'm going to use that as a segue into one of our activities for our anniversary. The anniversary of the council is on the 10th of February, but on the 9th, at the Market Day at Belmopan, we're hosting an aging exhibit. And at that exhibit, I'm sorry to say, Marlene, we're going to be doing age simulations.
Oh no! I did an arthritis simulation once on the show, and they tried to get me to button my clothing
while we had immobilized her fingers,
like someone who'd have arthritis. It was hard.
So we will be doing the age simulations at the exhibit, which gives persons an opportunity to, for a brief moment in time, pause and think. If I am in this situation, what would I need to make my life better? And there's one that we're going to do about standing in lines, stimulating an older person who might have some kind of disability with their legs or their feet, or even a diabetic who has issues with their nerves. But that's kind of part of the education that we need to get out to the community, because very often, unless we're in that situation, we have no sympathy, no empathy, no context for that situation. So by being able to put you in that situation, even for a short period of time, changes your awareness and makes you start looking for opportunities to make things better. Because I've been in lines in Belmopan where the older person will move to the front to take the priority spot, and the persons behind me will have a problem that this person has moved for a priority spot. So it's a large educational campaign that must be taking place. So we'll be doing those simulation. We'll be talking about normal aging, what to expect, because many times we think about growing old, we expect that, oh, this won't work, that won't work, I can't do this, I can't do that, I can't do the other. But it's all about creating opportunities and what we do to prepare ourselves to grow older. And we'll be looking at how aging has evolved in Belize, and where are we going, and our partner organizations.
So the target group for the exhibit is persons who are not necessarily in the aging bracket as yet?
Not necessarily. We've invited all the primary schools and the high schools in the Belmopan area, the business community. Interestingly enough, we've invited our senior groups that we work along with to be our volunteers to help us run the exhibit.
Wow.
Oh.
So we're kind of flipping
So they get that moment to see what
the
it feels
script.
like. Yeah.
We're flipping the script a little bit. But it's all towards looking, really, as we're talking about earlier, creating that opportunity for older persons to use their talents, their time, and creating that visibility that, you know, we are here and now and there are things that we can do, more than sitting down in a rocking chair and, you know, doing something sedentary.
And I actually, you know, there's all this talk about how important socializing is as an aging person. And I think that's perhaps a great reminder we could give to people who have an elderly person at home. Even if the conversation seems a bit repetitive, it is important that you engage in that conversation. Is that the case?
Yeah, something that was done by the council, and the intention is to repeat it in other districts, is a project that was called by Mr. Ix-Chel, Adopt a Grandparent. And basically, it is a nice project, and it should be repeated in other districts, whereby youth were targeted, actually students from high school, and they were trained on relating and communicating with the elderly, going to their homes, identifying needs, and bringing those needs to stakeholders who would be able to assist. So they would bring that information to the council or to other members of the community, especially the private sector. Then the private sector would respond by addressing those needs. So basically, those young persons served as facilitators. They approach, and that's why it was said, adopt a grandparent.
Nice.
And it was very successful. There was a very good response. So the intention is to make it a national endeavor, so that the youth would have as one volunteer activity that contact with the elderly and bring them to the forefront.
Yeah, so what we've developed from the Adopt a Grandparent program is we actually have a manual that schools and counselors can contact us, because all the markers in the program hits the requirements for community service. So you can do your community service and adopt a grandparent at the same time. What we found really curious about the program is that although we had expected the younger persons to really take a lead and, you know, train the older persons or teach the older persons to do new things, there was sort of a flip of the script all over again, with the older persons changing the dynamic, and the younger people saying, you know, I didn't know that she used to do this, or I didn't know that he could do that. One of the grandmothers taught their granddaughter to sew a skirt, and she modeled it at one of our showcases. Two of the grandparents taught their grandchildren to bottle preserves. Two of the girls taught one of the other grandparents to make corn tortillas. So it really diversified, and they only got together once for the week. They got together one time a week for an hour, and the only requirement was that they do something recreational. So it wasn't mentoring, and because that's a lot of time what we think about, you know, mentoring and, you want to set these young people straight. No, it's very social. It was very
doing
social.
an activity together.
And I think that really helped to change the dynamic and created for lots of opportunities for mutual learning.
You're a particularly young person heading an organization. It's almost paradoxical, ironic that do you think you being there, your energy and youthfulness actually translates, one, and two, how do you build on the relationship between these two groups, persons who are not of that bracket and persons who are in that bracket?
I think one of the important things to do is that we find common ground. We find common ground. Where are we the same, and where can we build from there? And that's something that I learned very early on coming at the council, that very often we get put off by appearances, and we put limits on people because we believe that they appear to be a certain way, or they shouldn't, you know. Your grandmother shouldn't be interested in dancing for 2 hours out of the week, but try a cancel a senior steps any day and you have a problem. So it's finding these common grounds and finding where we can build on them that will create the connection. And also eliminating the issue of fear. We'll find that as people get older, they begin to have barricades towards younger people. Oh, they're young people, this and this and this and this. And the younger people say, oh, they're old people, this and this and this and this. But the truth is, much of our personalities remain the same when we are younger, when we are older. There are certain fundamentals that don't change. So it's creating that ability, removing those barriers so that you recognize that the person who is now 70 and like to fix cars was once 21 like you and like to fix cars.
Yeah.
So how do we create those opportunities?
Okay.
And I think through creating those opportunities, we've been able to have a lot of success.
Well, I think we should definitely say congratulations to the council on this particular milestone. And of course, I really love that your open day is, as you call it, flipping the script and having other people experience some of the physical challenges that may come with aging. And of course, that takes place this Friday.
This Friday, the booth officially opens at 9 a.m. at the Market Square in Belmopan. It's a full walkthrough, so we're inviting anyone and everyone to come and take our tour. It's going to be a tour, and then we're really planning on moving smaller versions of the booth throughout the country.
Excellent.
This should be mandatory.
This should be mandatory.
8:30 a.m. to 2 p.m. on Friday.
Friday. And there's also an opportunity to win a few prizes specifically for people who are visiting us.
All right.
Once you've learned, there's always an opportunity.
Well, best of luck and happy anniversary in advance.
Thank you so much.
All right.
Thank you.
We're going to go ahead and take a break, and when we come back, we're actually going to be joined by Dara Robinson to talk about his upcoming tribute concert. So stay tuned.